A noise echoed that never belonged in a high school lunchroom. It wasn't the rattle of dishes or the chatter of rumors. It was the sound of a heart shattering. And then it became the sound of a creature stirring awake. We all witnessed it unfold. We saw the tormentors, led by the untouchable Jake Dalton in his glaring orange varsity jacket, crowd around the unfamiliar girl. We watched him seize her, hoist her up, and with a bellow of victory hurl her onto a cafeteria table, launching meals and plates outward. Wes saw her crash down broken and sobbing within the noodles and smashed potatoes. We believed that was where things finished. We were mistaken. That was the second their terror started. Because the girl they just disgraced wasn't a girl at all. She was a device, and they had just triggered the fuse. What followed was so rapid, so savage, and so unbelievable that it rewrote the social code of our entire school. The predators were flipped to prey, and they were forced to flee for their survival from Theon's soul they assumed was the frailest among them. Before we dive into the full horrifying tale of what happens when someone is shoved past their breaking point and the secret government-buried truth about the new girl is revealed, tap that subscribe button and hit the bell. The tale you're about to hear is a warning you'll never shake and you'll want to witness every single moment. The Northwood High Cafeteria stood as a shrine of social power, a vast chamber beneath the relentless buzzing blaze of fluorescent lamps that drained all life from the scene. The air was a heavy stew of clashing odors, oily pepperoni pizza, old ketchup, the harsh synthetic scent of industrial cleanser, and the sugary thick smell of fruit punch. The linoleum ground displayed a map of factions, the jocks beside the windows soaking up daylight, the theater kids near the stage, their voices a constant animated whisper, the science geeks clustered close to the labs and Theliners. The outsiders were scattered like dust specks in the corners hoping to banyord. At the peak of this kingdom stood Jake Dalton. At 19, he was a grown man towering over boys, his build shaped by years of muscle training, his short light brown hair always perfectly tousled, his jaw fixed in its usual mocking grin, his identity stitched into the fabric of his orange varsity jacket, the black letter across his chest serving as privilege. To his left stood Mike, all raw power and sly cruelty. To his right lurked Todd, rat-like and quick to snicker at Jake's torment. They formed his followers, and he was their ruler, leading through charmant intimidation. And then, 3 weeks into the autumn quarter, a new factor entered the formula. Silent, unreadable, strange, like danger wrapped quietly. Elara. She appeared suddenly like a phantom, forming in the corridor without a single sound. She was 19 like Jake, yet where he commanded space, she seemed to consume it. Her long, straight brown hair often fell across the left side of her face, a living curtain concealing the faint silvery scar that traced from her eyebrow to her cheekbone. Her clothes never changed much, worn olive-green sweaters, faded jeans, and scuffed boots. Not fashion, but uniform for vanishing into the background. Her eyes, a pale storm gray, never focused on the present. They looked through people, or perhaps past them, at something distant and unreachable. Rumors sprouted immediately. She's in witness protection. Her family burned in a fire. She was expelled from her last school for fighting. She never confirmed, never denied. When a teacher called her name, Elara Vesper, she flinched as if struck. When someone, usually a kind but clumsy classmate, asked about her scar, she'd reply in a whisper, "I fell." It was a lie everyone accepted. We branded her damaged goods. And in the merciless economy of high school, that label drained her worth. She became Jake's favorite target, a hissed taunt in the hall, a shoulder slam against the lockers, the slow public unmaking of a person. For him, it was entertainment. He had no idea he was tampering with a live explosive. The Tuesday everything detonated began with a crimson F scrawled across the top of Jake's history test, a blow to his pride, a fracture in his armor. He needed to reclaim control, to remind everyone of his dominance, and he knew exactly where to find it. Lunch period was in full swing. Elara sat at her usual table, a small, forgotten spot near the swinging kitchen doors and overflowing trash bins. The air around her reeked of old food and quiet misery. She wasn't eating. She was dissecting her mashed potatoes with the precision of a scientist, slow, deliberate, detached. Her tray was a still life of emptiness. Jake watched her from his throne, dark amusement flickering behind his eyes. "I'm bored," he said to Mike and Todd. "Time for a little show." The scrape of his chair was a gunshot. A wave of attention rippled through the room. The background chatter dimmed. We all knew this dance. We were participants by silence, paying the price of safety with our quiet consent. He swaggered forward, his shadow stretching across her tray. "What's wrong, scary Elara?" he mocked, voice thick with fake sympathy. "Lunch not good enough for you?" She didn't react. Her whole body was a statue carved from stillness. His grin tightened. He kicked the metal leg of Hurtable. The sound cracked through the air. Her milk carton jumped, toppled, and spilled, a white river streaking across the fake wood, pooling at her elbow. That's when we saw it. One perfect tear swelled in her eye, trembled, and slid down her cheek, curving away from therage of her scar. It was the first real emotion she had shown, something fragile and human. And it was everything Jake wanted to destroy. "You crying?" he sneered, lowering his face until their breath mixed. "You think that matters? You're nothing. You're a shadow. Look at me when I talk to you." His voice cracked through the hush that had fallen. Every sound in the cafeteria died. He reached out. His hands, broad and strong from years of football, didn't form fists. They grabbed her collar instead, twisting the coarse green sweater tight. He yanked hard. Elara was lighter than he expected. She rose from her chair with a gasp, her body limp unresisting. For a heartbeat, terrible and electric, he held her there, suspended. A puppet whose strings had snapped. The triumph on his face was pure and cruel. He took 2 heavy steps, dragging her, and with a guttural roar of effort, threw her. The world fractured into slow motion. Trays froze mid-air. Forks hovered. A collective breath hung between heartbeats. The impact echoed, a crash of flesh and metal and disbelief. Food burst across the floor like shrapnel. Elara's body hit Thetable's edge, crumpled, and fell into a heap among splattered sauce and spilled milk. For a long second, nothing moved. Then Jake laughed, a single, sharp bark that cut through the stunned silence. It was victory, cruel and hollow, and somewhere beneath that laughter, something ancient and dark stirred awake. She flew like a rag doll through the air. Her back struck the next table where a group of terrified sophomore boys sat frozen in place. The collision made a grotesque, wet crack of flesh and plastic colliding. It wasn't just a fall, it was desecration. Trays burst upward. A storm of green beans and corn scattered across the cafeteria. A half-eaten plate of spaghetti and meatballs splattered across her, sweater in a horrific smear of red and brown, a chocolate. Milk carton exploded on the wall, oozing downward like blood. She lay there, spread out on the table, a fallen angel in a cafeteria purgatory. Food clung to her hair, her face, her clothes. Her chest shuddered with silent, broken sobs. Tears streamed freely now, carving pale tracks through the grime. The scar on her cheek burned vivid and angry against her flushed skin. Jake stood above her, chest heaving, a self-crowned conqueror basking in ruin. He pointed a shaking finger. "Stay down!" he barked. His voice cracked with exhaustion and triumph. "That's your place, in the trash." For a heartbeat, it looked like he was right. She was broken. We had seen it happen, but then the sobbing shifted. It deepened, mutated. The weak, helpless gasps turned into something older, darker, something torn from a pit deeper than lungs. Her shoulders tensed, her fingers, slick with mashed potatoes, dug into her palms until the whites of her knuckles gleamed from yards away. Then came the sound. It began low, a guttural moan, endless and dancient. The sound of a grave cracking open. It grew, gathering force, rising from her chest until it ripped through the cafeteria air. A primal animal scream. It was not the cry of a teenage girl. It was grief distilled into violence, a sound born from nightmares and memory. It didn't shatter the windows, but it shattered what we thought she was. The scream cut off, sudden as a blade. Then, moving like a machine rather than a human being, Elara pushed herself up. Her legs swung over the table edge and she stood. The motion wasn't clumsy or shaken. It was fluid, balanced, and unnervingly precise. She swiped her hand across her mouth, smearing ketchup into streaks that looked like war paint. When she lifted her head and met Jake's eyes, something was gone. The distant gray emptiness had vanished, replaced by an arctic, focused void. No tears, no fury, just nothing, pure and absolute. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. Her tone was flat, mechanical, drained of every human note. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. Jake's mask slipped for half a second. Then pride reasserted itself. He laughed, the sound hollow and sharp. Or what? He jeered. "You gonna cry again, scary Elara?" She stepped forward, not timidly, not in fear, but with the measured certainty of a predator closing in. "You brought it back," she whispered. The words trembled with sorrow, not rage. "You made me remember." For the first time in his reign, Jake's instincts twitched, a flicker of warning dulled by arrogance. He decided to end it, to prove his place at the top once more. He swung, a wide, predictable right hook, his trademark punch, all power and ego. Elara didn't flinch. She moved, a subtle tilt of her head and his fist cut through empty air, momentum spinning him off balance. In the same seamless motion, her left hand rose, not as a fist, but as a weapon. The heel of her palm drove upward beneath his nose with a sickening, wet crunch. Jake screamed, a shrill animal sound of shock and pain. Blood flooded down his face, dripping across his mouth and spattering his prized jacket. He stumbled backward, hands clutching his ruined nose, eyes wide with disbelief. "My nose." "She broke my nose!" he shrieked. Elara didn't answer. She stood still, carved from fury and silence, a statue of vengeance made flesh. Mike and Todd, seeing their leader fall, bellowed and charged. The shift in energy was instant. No longer 3 against 1. Now it was 3 against something else. Mike lunged low, arms outstretched, aiming for her waist. Elara didn't retreat. She dropped her weight, twisted on her heel, and turned his momentum against him. He went airborne, flipped over her hip, and slammed into the ground with a thud that made the tables tremble. Todd froze mid-run, mouth open, caught between fear and disbelief. For the first time, we saw it, the apex predators of Northwood High, realizing they weren't at the top anymore. Jake staggered upright, blood pouring through his fingers, fury overtaking pain. "You're dead!" he roared, voice thick with rage and blood. But Elara was already moving, a blur of precision and purpose. Every motion too exact, too trained. Her body didn't move like a student's. It moved like a soldier's. He flew through the air and slammed back first into a tower of blue plastic chairs. They shattered and clattered beneath him, driving the air from his lungs in a ragged wheeze. Todd threw a wild swing. Elara's hand shot out, catching his fist mid-motion, her grip like tempered steel. Shet whisted, a blur of precision, rotating his arm in a tight, brutal arc that leveraged his wrist and elbow at once. A sharp crack rang out, like a cable snapping. Todd screamed, collapsing to his knees, his arm dangling at a wrong, impossible angle. His shoulder was out of its socket. 10 seconds. That's all it took. Mike lay gasping amid shattered chairs. Todd sobbed on the floor, clutching his useless arm. Jake stood frozen, bloodied, trembling, staring at the wreckage. Elara turned toward him, her eyes hollow and unfeeling. She stepped forward. Ketchup streaked her face, food clung to her hair, and her gaze was pure void. She was nightmare-made flesh. "My name," she said, voice low, eerily steady. "It's not scary Elara. It's Vesper. And the last person who made me feel like this is dead." She didn't say it to intimidate him. She said it like history. Cold, factual, irreversible, and in that instant, Jake Dalton, the bully, the king, the untouchable, learned what real fear was, not fear of pain. Fear of erasure. His instincts seized control. Run. He turned. He didn't look at Mike, didn't glance at Todd. He abandoned his friends, his jacket, his crown. He bolted. Slipped in spilled gravy, regained footing, and tore for the double doors, an orange and red blur of panic and blood. His escape shattered the spell. The cafeteria erupted. Chairs toppled, trays clanged, students screamed and scattered. Dozens fled from the epicenter, from the quiet girl who had become chaos incarnate. And in the eye of that storm, Elara Vesper stood still. The rage in her eyes faded. Replaced by exhaustion's deep, it bent her shoulders. She looked down at her hands, at Jake's blood drying on her palm. She glanced around at the carnage, at faces twisted with horror, seeing not gratitude or sympathy, only terror. In that silence, isolation closed in heavier than ever. She had survived, but she had lost the world. She didn't run. She didn't gloat. She simply turned, walking through the wreckage with weary grace toward the same doors Jake had escaped through. Each step deliberate, heavy, final, behind her. Silence screamed louder than any cry. Then came the aftermath. Sirens, whispers, panic. Ambulances hauled Mike and Todd away. Police swarmed the halls, locking the school down. Rumors spread faster than fire, each retelling wilder than the last. But the truth, when it came, was stranger than myth. It didn't come from the principal. It arrived in the form of two strangers, a man and a woman in dark suits, their faces carved from granite. They stepped from an unmarked sedan, badges flashing quiet authority. Through cracked office doors, hushed gossip spilled, and a different story took shape. Elara Vesper wasn't simply a troubled girl. She was the lone surviving daughter of a radical militia leader. She hadn't grown up with birthday candles or slumber parties. She had grown up on firing ranges and combat mats, drilled in hand-to-hand tactics and distrust of the world. The scar on her face? Shrapnel. From the FBI raid that ended her parents' lives in a storm of bullets and fire. She'd been placed at Northwood High through witness protection, a desperate attempt at normalcy, a fragile experiment now shattered beyond repair. The incident at her last school? A smaller version of what had just happened, her conditioning triggered, her training unleashed. Jake Dalton, with his cruel arrogance, had unknowingly created her deepest trauma, the domination, the humiliation, the attack. He hadn't bullied a fragile girl. He'd poked a sleeping soldier. Jake never came back to Northwood. His parents moved him out of state, Before week's end, his orange varsity jacket turned up. Later, in a trash bin behind the gym, blood-stained, forgotten. Mike recovered from his bruises but developed a stutter. Todd's shoulder healed, yet his range of motion remained limited, a permanent reminder of the day they picked the wrong target. The school introduced strict anti-bullying reforms, but it felt pointless, closing the barn door after the barn had burned to ash. We never saw Vesper again. The agents took her away, but her shadow lingered. She haunted the halls in rumor and memory. Her story became legend, a cautionary ghost tale we whispered to freshmen when the lights flickered. We learned something that day that every quiet person carries unseen battles, that the calmest eyes might hide the fiercest storms. That silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it means restraint. The bullies thought they'd won when they hurled the new girl onto a table. They hadn't earned victory. They'd signed their own downfall. They learned that the prey they created was, in truth, a predator they had unchained. This story stands as a warning. Everyone you meet is fighting a hidden war. Respect the quiet ones, because the strength they conceal might be far greater than you could ever imagine. So, where are you watching from? Tell me your state in the comments and share what you believe lies inside the quietest hearts among us.